Hi, I'm Charlie. Thank you for spending a little time with me today. Every story I share comes from a moment that changed how I understood myself, my family, or the world around me. Today's story is one of the quieter ones, but it's the one I find myself returning to the most, especially on nights when I can't sleep and my mind starts wandering backward instead of forward. It's not a story with a single dramatic moment that changed everything. It's a story about a slow unfolding, like a flower that takes its sweet time opening, no matter how much you might want to rush it. I still remember the day it started, even though I didn't understand back then what it was the start of. I was 8 years old, and it was the kind of late summer afternoon where the light turns gold around 4 o'clock and stays that way for hours, like the sun is in no hurry to leave. My sister Maddie is 2 years older than me, and that day she'd gotten a new dress for our cousin's birthday party, a soft yellow thing with little white flowers stitched along the hem. I remember standing in the doorway of her room, watching her twirl in front of the mirror, and something in my chest did this strange flip, like missing a step on the stairs. I didn't have words for it. I just knew I wanted to feel what she looked like she was feeling. Maddie caught me staring and, being Maddie, didn't make a thing of it the way another sibling might have. She just said, "You want to try it?" Like it was the most natural question in the world. And because I was 8 and the house was empty except for us, because our parents were out back doing yard work and wouldn't be in for at least another hour, I said yes before I'd even really decided to. I remember the fabric more than anything. How light it was. How it moved when I moved, like it was alive in some small way. I remember looking at myself in Maddie's mirror and feeling something settle in me that I didn't have a name for. A rightness that confused me even as I felt it. I didn't think, I am a girl. I didn't think anything that articulate. I just felt, for about 4 minutes, like I was looking at someone who made sense. And then I heard the back door open downstairs, and panic moved through me so fast I nearly tripped getting the dress off. Maddie helped me, laughing under her breath, not because she thought it was funny in a cruel way, but because she was 8 years old too, in spirit, the way older siblings sometimes still are when no one's watching. "Our secret," she said, and I nodded, and that was that. Or I thought that was that. I didn't understand yet that something had cracked open in me that wouldn't close back up. Not really. Not ever again. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest event of the year was the county fair, and the second biggest was the 4th of July parade that went exactly 4 blocks before turning around. My dad worked at the hardware store his father had started, and my mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school I'd later attend. We weren't religious in a strict way, but we went to church on Easter and Christmas, said grace before big family dinners, and generally lived inside a fairly traditional shape of what a family was supposed to look like. I don't say that with any bitterness. My parents loved us fiercely, in the practical, sleeves-rolled-up way of people who show love through casseroles and showing up to every soccer game, rather than through long emotional conversations. It just meant that the language I would have needed, even if I'd had the words, wasn't really spoken in our house. For a long time after that day with the dress, I didn't think about it much, at least not in a way I could have explained to anyone. It became one of those memories that sits quietly in the back of your mind, occasionally surfacing when something nearby reminds you of it, then sinking back down. What did surface more regularly was a kind of low, persistent discomfort I couldn't place. I hated getting my hair cut short. I hated the boys' section of the clothing store, the navy and gray and forest green of it all, the practical, sturdy fabrics that always felt like they were bracing for impact rather than letting you breathe. I gravitated toward my mother's old box of costume jewelry whenever we visited my grandmother. Not to wear it exactly, just to hold it, to look at how the light caught the fake rhinestones. My grandmother, my mom's mother, was the one who first said something that planted a seed, though she had no idea she was doing it. I was maybe 10, and we were going through an old photo album at her kitchen table, the linoleum cool under my legs, the smell of her coffee thick in the air. There was a photo of my mom as a little kid, hair in 2 messy braids, climbing a tree in overalls. "Your mama was such a tomboy," my grandmother said, tapping the photo. "Climbed everything. I used to despair of ever getting her into a dress for church." She laughed, a warm, crackling laugh. "People are just who they are, Charlie. Took me a while to learn that lesson, but I did eventually." I didn't say anything in response, just nodded and kept turning pages. But something about it lodged in me. People are just who they are. It was such a simple sentence, and she meant it about my mother's preference for trees over dresses. But some part of me filed it away as a kind of permission slip I didn't yet know I'd need. Middle school was its own particular kind of difficult, the way I think it is for almost everyone, but with an added layer I couldn't quite articulate even to myself. I had 2 close friends, Devin and Priya, and we were inseparable in that fierce, all-consuming way middle schoolers are with their friendships. Like the friendship itself is a small civilization you're building together. Devin was loud and a little chaotic and obsessed with skateboarding. Priya was quiet and precise and could draw better than anyone I'd ever met. I was somewhere in between them, I think. The one who kept the peace, who noticed when someone was upset before they said anything. It was Priya, actually, who first noticed something about me that I hadn't said out loud to anyone. We were at her house, the 2 of us lying on her bedroom floor doing homework that had long since been abandoned in favor of talking. And she was sketching me, the way she liked to sketch her friends sometimes, just for fun. "Can I ask you something weird?" she said, not looking up from the paper. "Sure." "Do you ever feel like you got assigned the wrong instructions? Like everyone else got a manual for how to be themselves and yours got swapped with someone else's?" I remember going very still. It was such a strange, specific way to put something I'd never been able to put into words at all. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Sometimes." She nodded, like that confirmed something she'd already suspected, and didn't push further, just kept drawing. I've thought about that conversation 100 times since. Priya wasn't trying to diagnose me or label me. She was just a perceptive kid who noticed her friend seemed to be carrying something heavy and gently let me know she'd seen it, without demanding I explain it before I was ready. High school is where things started to take a clearer shape, though clearer doesn't mean it was easy. I want to be honest about that, because I think sometimes stories like mine get told in a way that skips over the murky, uncomfortable middle parts, and I don't want to do that, because the murky middle parts were most of it. I started spending time on forums and message boards late at night, the blue light of my old laptop the only light in my room, reading things other people had written about feeling like their body and their sense of self were in some kind of disagreement with each other. I didn't tell anyone I was doing this. I felt like I was sneaking around inside my own head, which is a strange and lonely feeling. Some nights I'd read for hours, recognizing pieces of myself in stranger after stranger's words, and other nights I'd close the laptop fast, almost guiltily, telling myself I was being dramatic, that I was just a weird kid going through a phase, that I should stop reading into things. The word transgender first really landed for me, really settled into my body instead of just passing through my mind, during a unit in my sophomore year health class. Our teacher, Miss Alvarez, was younger than most of the other teachers, and she taught the unit on gender and identity with more care than I think the curriculum even required of her. She used clear, kind language. She didn't make it sound scary or strange. She talked about how gender identity was a person's internal sense of who they are, and how that could be different from the sex someone was assigned at birth, and how for some people, realizing this took time, sometimes a lot of time. I sat in the back of that classroom with my heart pounding so hard I was sure the kid next to me could hear it. It felt like someone had finally handed me a flashlight in a room I'd been stumbling around in the dark for years. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't say anything to anyone. I went home and sat in my room and cried for reasons I couldn't fully explain to myself, except that it felt like relief and grief arriving at the same time. relief at finally having language, grief for all the years I'd spent without it. That night I looked in the mirror for a long time, longer than I usually let myself, really looking instead of glancing. I tried to separate what I saw from what I felt, the way you might try to peel two photographs apart that have stuck together. The body in the mirror was a boy's body, by every label the world had given it. But there was a feeling underneath that body that had never matched, a feeling I'd been quietly arguing myself out of since I was 8 years old in my sister's bedroom. I whispered, just to myself, just to test how it felt in my mouth. I think I might be a girl. The room didn't change. The world outside my window kept being exactly the same. But something in my chest loosened just slightly, like a knot that had been pulled tight for years finally getting a little give. I want to be clear that this wasn't a lightning bolt moment that resolved everything. If anything, it opened up a new, more complicated chapter. Because now I had a word for what I felt, but I had no idea what to do with it. I didn't know how to tell anyone. I didn't know if I even wanted to tell anyone yet, or if I just wanted to sit with this private knowledge a little longer, turning it over like a stone in my pocket, getting used to its shape before I showed it to the world. The first person I told, eventually, was Maddie. It felt right that it would be her, given where this whole story had started. I was 16 by then, she was 18 and about to leave for college, and there was a strange tenderness to that summer before she left. Like we both knew something was ending, even if neither of us said it directly. We were in her car one night, parked outside the Dairy Queen where we'd just gotten ice cream. Windows down, the radio playing low. I don't even remember what we'd been talking about before, something unimportant. And then there was a pause, and I just said it. I think I'm a girl. Like, actually. Not like a joke or a phase. I've thought about it for a long time. Maddie didn't say anything for a moment, and I remember being terrified of that silence. My whole body braced for I didn't know what. Then she reached over and took my hand, the way she used to when we were little kids crossing the street. Okay, she said. Thank you for telling me. And then, after another pause, quieter, do you remember the dress? I laughed, a wet, surprised laugh, because of course she remembered too. I think about it all the time, I admitted. I always wondered, she said. Not in a weird way, just, you looked so happy that day. I never forgot it. She squeezed my hand. I love you. I don't totally understand everything yet, but I want to. You're still my sibling, however that looks. I cried in that car for a long time, Maddie just sitting with me, not rushing me, not needing me to explain myself more than I had. It's strange how much relief there can be in being witnessed without judgment, even before anything else has changed. Telling Devin and Priya came next, separately, over the following months. Devin's reaction was the one I was most nervous about, honestly, because Devin had always been so emphatically, performatively masculine, in the way some teenage boys are, all loud opinions about sports and posturing that I sometimes worried meant he wouldn't have room in his understanding of the world for something like this. But Devin surprised me. He went quiet for a second, processing, and then said, Okay, I'm going to probably mess up pronouns sometimes while I get used to it, but I'm not going anywhere. You're still the person who taught me how to ollie. That doesn't change. Something about how plainly practical he was about it actually helped more than a more emotional reaction might have. It made it feel less like a crisis and more like a fact we were both adjusting to together. Priya, when I told her, just nodded slowly and said, I think some part of me has known since we were 13, lying on my floor. She smiled. I'm glad you finally get to know it too. Telling my parents took the longest, almost a full year after I'd told my friends, and I think that delay says something true about how families work, how the people closest to us can sometimes be the hardest to be honest with because the stakes feel so much higher. I was terrified of disappointing them, of breaking some picture they'd carried of who their child was going to grow up to be. I chose a Sunday evening, after dinner, when the dishes were done and the house had that particular quiet calm it got on Sunday nights before the week started up again. My dad was reading the paper in his recliner, My mom was folding laundry on the couch, and I stood in the doorway of the living room the way I had stood in Maddie's doorway all those years before, feeling like I was about to step off some kind of ledge. "Can we talk?" I said. And something in my voice must have signaled this was serious, because my dad set the paper down immediately, and my mom paused mid-fold. I'd practiced what I was going to say probably 100 times in my head, but in the moment it came out simpler than any version I'd rehearsed. "I need to tell you something about myself that I've known for a while now and been scared to say. I'm transgender. I'm a girl. I have been this whole time, even when I didn't have the words for it." My mom's hands stilled completely on the laundry. My dad's face did something complicated. Surprise and confusion, and something else I couldn't quite read, moving across it. For a long, long moment, nobody said anything, and I stood there feeling like the silence might swallow me whole. It was my mom who spoke first, and her voice was shaky but gentle. "Okay," she said, echoing what Maddie had said in the car all that time ago, like it was some kind of family password for love, trying to find its footing. "Okay. Thank you for telling us." She stood up and crossed the room and hugged me, and I felt her hands trembling slightly against my back, not with rejection, I understood later, but with the enormity of trying to absorb something that reshaped how she understood her child's whole life and future in the span of about 30 seconds. My dad was quieter. He didn't get up right away. "I need a little time," he said, not unkindly, just honestly. "This isn't what I expected tonight, but you're my kid. That's not changing. I just need to understand it better." He looked at me for a long moment. "Are you happy? Is this making you happy, figuring this out?" I thought about the question seriously before I answered, because I wanted to give him the truth, not just the answer that would be easiest. "It's scary," I said, "but yeah. Underneath the scary part, it feels like relief. Like I finally get to stop pretending to be someone I'm not." He nodded slowly. "Then I want to learn how to support that," he said. "Even if I mess it up sometimes while I'm learning. I won't pretend that conversation fixed everything instantly, or that the months afterward were smooth. There were hard moments. My dad slipped up on pronouns more times than I could count for the first year, and each slip felt like a small paper cut, even when I knew it wasn't intentional. My mom had a harder time than I expected with the idea of a new name, holding on to the one she'd chosen for me as a baby, with the grief I came to understand wasn't about rejecting me, but about mourning a particular imagined future she'd carried for years without realizing how tightly she'd been holding it. We chose my name together, actually, which I think helped more than almost anything else in the whole process. I'd been sitting with a few options privately for months, names I'd tried on the way I'd tried on that yellow dress all those years ago, testing how they felt in my mouth and in my chest. But I wanted my family to be part of choosing it too. Not because I needed their permission, but because I wanted them to feel like they were still part of building who I was becoming, the way they'd been part of building who I'd been before. We sat around the kitchen table one night, the same table where my grandmother had once shown me the photo of my mother as a tomboy in overalls, and we went through a list. My mom suggested a name that had been her grandmother's, my great-great-grandmother, a woman named Charlotte who had apparently been famously stubborn and famously kind in equal measure, according to family legend. Something about it felt right immediately, like a key turning in a lock. Charlotte. Charlie for short, which felt like it honored both who I'd been called before and who I was becoming, a bridge instead of a wall between my past and my present. "Charlie," my dad said, trying it out loud for the first time, testing the shape of it. "Yeah, that suits you." And something in the way he said it, easy and certain, told me he meant it, that he wasn't just performing acceptance, but actually arriving at it. School was its own complicated landscape during this time. I want to be honest that it wasn't all warmth and understanding. There were kids who were cruel, in the casual, careless way teenagers sometimes are when they haven't yet learned that words land on real people. There was a stretch of a few months where I dreaded the hallways between classes, where I'd time my bathroom visits carefully to avoid confrontation, where I became smaller in public than I felt in private, folding myself down to take up less space and attract less attention. But there were also unexpected pockets of kindness that I've never forgotten. My English teacher, Mr. Whitfield, an older man who I would never have guessed would be one of my staunchest allies, started using my correct name and pronouns the very first day I asked him to, without hesitation, without making it a bigger deal than it needed to be, just folding it into the ordinary rhythm of taking attendance like it was the easiest thing in the world. A girl named Sasha, who I'd never been particularly close with before, started sitting with me at lunch during the worst stretch of that year. Not saying much about it directly, just quietly making sure I wasn't alone, which I came to understand was its own profound form of kindness, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. I think one of the most important things I learned during those years was that self-acceptance isn't a single door you walk through once and then you're simply on the other side forever changed. It's more like a long hallway with many doors, and you walk through one and find yourself in a room that has more doors in it. And you keep walking, keep opening, keep discovering more rooms you didn't know were there. There were days I felt completely solid in who I was, walking through the world like I'd always belonged exactly as myself. And there were other days, especially early on, where doubt would creep back in, where I'd wonder if I was making a mistake, if I'd imagined the whole thing, if I should just go back to pretending because pretending had at least been familiar. What helped me through those wobblier days, more than anything, was remembering small moments like the one with my sister in the yellow dress, like Priya's gentle observation on her bedroom floor, like my grandmother's offhand comment about people being who they are. I started to understand that the truth of myself hadn't been a sudden invention I'd dreamed up as a teenager looking for attention or difference, the way some unkind voices in my life suggested. It had been there all along, in small, consistent threads running all the way back to childhood, patient and quiet, waiting for me to have the language and the courage to follow it. There's a particular memory from my senior year of high school that I think captures, better than almost anything else, what self-acceptance actually felt like once it started to settle into something steadier. It was prom season, and I'd been agonizing for weeks over what to wear. Not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because wanting it so openly, in such a public setting, in front of my entire graduating class, felt like an enormous leap. I'd been out for over a year by then, had transitioned socially in most parts of my life, but there was something about a formal dress, about photographs that would exist forever, about walking into that gymnasium transformed into a starlit ballroom in front of everyone I'd grown up with, that made the stakes feel higher than they had in a long time. My mom came with me to find the dress, which felt significant in itself, a kind of full-circle moment neither of us spoke about directly, but that I think we both felt. We went to 3 different stores before we found it. A deep blue dress with a subtle shimmer to the fabric, simple but striking, nothing like the yellow dress from childhood, except in the way it made me feel when I looked in the mirror. That same rightness, that same settling in my chest, except now it wasn't tangled up with panic and secrecy. Now it was just quiet, certain happiness. "You look beautiful," my mom said in the dressing room, and her voice cracked slightly on the word, and I understood that crack wasn't sadness anymore, not really. It was just the ordinary overwhelm of watching your child become fully, visibly themselves after years of watching them hide. My dad took photos before I left for prom, fumbling a little with the camera the way he always did, telling me to stand by the staircase, by the fireplace, with Maddie, who'd come home from college that weekend specifically for this. I remember him saying, almost to himself, "I'm proud of you, kiddo," and then catching himself, "Sorry, I'm proud of you, Charlie," correcting the old habit of an old name without making a production of it, just gently steering himself back to the truth of who I was. I think about that night a lot. Not because anything dramatic happened at the dance itself, which was honestly fairly ordinary as far as school dances go. Too loud music and uncomfortable shoes, and the particular bittersweetness of knowing high school was ending. What I think about instead is the drive home afterward. My friends and I piled into Devon's car, windows down again, the summer air warm and the radio playing something we all sang badly together. I looked out the window at the familiar streets of our small town passing by, streets I'd walked and biked and driven 1,000 times, and I felt, for maybe the first time so completely, like the person living my life and the person I actually was had finally become the same person. Not a costume. Not a secret kept in a sister's bedroom. Just me, finally allowed to be fully visible in my own life. I won't pretend that everything has been simple since then. Self-acceptance, I've learned, isn't a finish line you cross and then never think about again. It's something you keep choosing, in small ways, on ordinary days, for the rest of your life. There are still moments of doubt sometimes, still hard conversations with relatives who are slower to understand, still small griefs for the parts of childhood that were harder than they needed to be, because I didn't have the language or the safety to be myself sooner. But underneath all of that, there's a steadiness now that wasn't there before, a sense of having finally come home to myself after a long, winding journey to get there. My grandmother, the one who'd shown me that photograph all those years ago, lived long enough to see me come into myself, and I'll never forget the conversation we had not long before she passed, the two of us back at her kitchen table, the same linoleum, the same smell of coffee, years and years after that first conversation about my mother climbing trees. "You know," she said, taking my hand in her papery, familiar one, "I think I always sensed something different about you, even when you were small. I didn't have the words for it back then, and maybe if I had, I would have understood sooner what I was sensing. But I want you to know, Charlie, that the person sitting in front of me now is exactly who I always loved. You didn't become someone new. You just finally let the rest of us see who you'd been all along." I think that's the truest way I've ever heard it put. Truer than anything I could have written myself. I didn't become someone new the day I tried on my sister's yellow dress, or the day I learned the word transgender in a 10th grade health class, or the day I told my parents at the kitchen table, or the day I walked into prom in deep blue fabric that finally matched the person underneath it. Those were all just moments along a long, slow path of letting the truth catch up to the surface, of finding, piece by piece, conversation by conversation, the name and the shape and the life that had always actually been mine. If there's anything I hope someone listening to this story takes away, it's that you don't have to have it all figured out in one dramatic moment. Self-discovery, at least the way I experienced it, was made up of dozens of small, ordinary instances: a sister's kindness, a friend's perceptive observation, a teacher's clear and caring words, a grandmother's offhand wisdom, a quiet conversation at a kitchen table. None of those moments alone would have been enough. It was the accumulation of them, the slow, patient layering of understanding and acceptance, both from the people around me and from myself, that finally let me become fully who I'd always been underneath. Thank you for listening to my story today. If something in my journey reminded you of your own, I hope you remember that growth often begins with the smallest, quietest moments, long before anyone else can see them happening. Be patient with yourself, the way the people who loved me learned to be patient with me, and the way I eventually learned to be patient with myself too. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you again in the next story. I'm Charlie.